Kia ora koutou. We'll kick off very shortly. We'll just give it another minute or so before we begin the meeting. Good all. I don't think we're gonna have too many other people jump on the next couple of minutes, so we'll kick off. I'd like to invite you to provide a karakia if you wouldn't mind.
Kia ora. Tēnā rā tātai, puhi mai nei. Ki te aha ki te kōrero ki te wānanga o tēnei o ngā awa. Ngā awa tapu, ngā awa whaimana o tēnei o ngā rohe. Anō e rako tukau i te karakia kia wāhia ki ngā mai. Ka wāhia o te awa putai tua, putai waho o te pakia kau te rā kai wama areni kua mai rera ki o mai te maro whenua ruka tāne, raro tāne, wakapaku tāne, raka hi tāne. Tō haka no te ariki hoa tua ue tāne ki uta. Aumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Kia ora tū mai. Councillor Robertson, sorry. Do you have any introductory remarks?
Yeah, kia ora everybody. I can see there's a few others joining us at the moment. I can see that Councillor Kate Wilson is here. There's probably other ORC councillors, but the important thing is to welcome everyone from the community and from stakeholders, from iwi, and all the interested people in the Taieri catchment. Wow, what a catchment it is as well. Taieri being the fourth longest river in New Zealand, 2 kilometres, I think, shorter than Whanganui. So very close. And what a diverse catchment it is as well. Some of the driest areas in New Zealand, classified essentially as a desert, right through to lush plains on the lower Taieri. And some very productive land, some land with urban centres in it, of Mosgiel as well. So yeah, also probably one of the first areas in Otago to have operative rules in our first water plan. And that was a big process for a lot of people in the Taieri going through that and setting some of those baseline rules in the early days. So some of those minimum flows and the blood, sweat and tears that went into that. And then the journey that the Taieri has been on since those days as well. There's been a heap of collaborative work and integrated catchment management work through the Taieri. People have worked together. They've built quite strong bonds, despite coming from really diverse backgrounds. We've shared a lot in common through the Taieri. Initially in those days, I worked for the ORC as a staff member as we developed that first plan. It was a long time ago. Since then, we've really developed some very strong leaders in this catchment who have been looked up to not just locally, but regionally and also nationally. So I guess whatever our views, I know that the Taieri is in a really, really good place for developing to the next level through the next phase and water plan that we'll put in place together through this process. So this will be a new generation plan. And I guess it marks just the next step on a positive journey for the Taieri. So yeah, I don't need to say anything more because it's important we have enough time to hear what this process will be about and where you can be involved throughout. So over to you, David. Thank you.
Good, Councillor Robertson. And it is really important to acknowledge the good work that's being done up there and the number of farmer leaders and community leaders. And I think goes without saying, we would rather be doing this in person, meeting face to face, particularly when we can get that engagement around what we're planning to do and the good work that's already happening and is about to happen. We have a very, very strong intention to come back to you at the end of this year. This is the first of a series of 3 tranches of public meetings. And for the second and third tranches, we will be having those in person, face to face. Could you go to slide 2, please, Amber? So the purpose of this meeting is to identify your freshwater values in the Tayari Freshwater Management Unit and to hear from you the characteristics that contribute to those values. That's so we can go away, work out what environmental outcomes we need to deliver to provide for those values. And that's when we come back at the second and third meeting to discuss around the environmental outcomes and how we're going to get there. This is a map of the Tayari Freshwater Management Unit, or FMU. The blue line is very important. We're looking for feedback on values and characteristics within the area delineated by the blue line. It's important because the map or the FMU map may not align with what you consider to be a community of interest in the Taieri, but that is what we're talking about here today. And of course, there are other consultations on the areas around in the other FMU or rohe. Just before we get into the meeting itself, just a few logistics. Firstly, it's important to note the Zoom session is being recorded and will go up on ORC's website and YouTube channel for everyone to watch afterwards. That's also a good reminder to keep yourself on mute. The Zoom is set up so that only the person speaking will show up on the screen, and apologise in advance because sometimes that'll be me. Please make sure you're on mute so that we don't get any background noise coming through. If you have a question, please write it in the chat. As we go through, we'll stop the presentation every now and then to have a bit of a Q&A and discussion. If you write the question in the chat, I will note that and come back to you during those Q&A sessions. And if you want to say something when we're going through the Q&A session specifically, please use the wee hand icon at the bottom toolbar of the Zoom screen. We've had feedback from previous meetings that some of the questions and answers we can start getting into a wee bit too detailed, particularly in some of these areas where we've got some parallel processes going on. So if we do start going down a track where I think we need to pull it back to the purpose of the meeting, I will do that. It's not to cut you off, but we can continue some of these conversations offline or outside of this call. A project manager, Rachel Curry, has put her text message cell phone number in the chat there. So if you have any issues with Zoom, please get in touch with Rachel. Can we just move on and ask mana whenua to provide a perspective, please?
O tēnā tātou kua whakarau I ka mai I te pōnei. Nōku te waimari e ki te kōrero ki a tātou I te pōnei. Mō tō tātou hononga o tātou o Māori I tēnei wā. So just, yeah, thank you, David, and just want to acknowledge everybody's presence tonight, looking at the importance of the Tayari awa to us all. And so it is my privilege to speak tonight on a Kāi Tahu perspective on the importance of water to mana whenua being the local Indigenous people to these lands here. To do this, I want to share an insight into a Kāi Tahu worldview. It's from this worldview that our language, cultural practices and traditions, our values are centred upon. Fundamental concept is whakapapa, and in its most simplest form, whakapapa means genealogy. So our whakapapa spans through to the beginning of our universe, closely aligned to the Big Bang Theory, in my view, and that it speaks about those life forms are created from te pō, the darkness, te kore, the void, through to te ao marama, the light. And from that is born māku, which is the dampness, or so here we see the beginnings of what we recognise as water, who couples with mahora nui Aotea, the great expanse of water, and from that union comes Raki Nui, or our Sky Father. Sky Father, Raki Nui couples with Papa Tuanuku, and they have many offspring, eventuating in the lineage through to human form today, including all life forms on our planet. And so through that lineage we see and we connect with water through our whakapapa. And so when we talk about the first human occupation to Te Waipounamu in our worldview, that comes through Rākai Hautu, and he was a great navigator who came from across the Pacific, from Patunui or Aio, and landed here in Te Waipounamu, working his way down, naming and shaping many of our waterways, including some of the Great Lakes, Waihora ki Taieri, which you may know as Waihola, included. And so it's through that whakapapa we have this interconnectedness to our ocean, mountains, forests, rivers, lakes, streams, to the trees, rocks, fish, birds, and the water that we harvest. Through whakapapa, we are inextricably connected to our environment, to which we have responsibilities and rights to uphold under our law, LORE, that's our tikanga and kawa. And so those rights and responsibilities also include recognising and protecting mauri, which are those life-giving principles. And, you know, water for us, those rivers, streams, lakes, coastlines, they were also our highways, and they enabled us to connect inland to areas that we followed, those ancestral trails, which lead us to our wāhi nohoaka mahika kai, which are our food gathering and harvesting places. And so Kāi Tahu, as a tribal entity, have undertaken a project called Kāhuru Manu, where we have, using traditional archives, we've mapped out a lot of these areas and places of importance to us. And we have over 5,000 place names in that resource, of which about 1,500 are available to the public. And so many of these names are within this area that we're speaking about tonight. And so we've had a long association, deep connection with our awa. And so when we look to the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, Te Mana o Te Wai, it really does encompass those of our values, especially in those 6 key principles, and also that hierarchy of obligations, recognising that the health and well-being of the water is integral to our health and well-being. And so, you know, giving priority or giving effect to that really does resonate with us and our values. I'm actually going to hand over, so we're going to do a team presentation tonight, and I'm going to hand over to Tumai, who's going to share some of his insights. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So I'm just going to support what Paulette was explaining about our perspectives and our connection to our river. So a lot of people don't know this, but the word Taieri is actually the incorrect name for this river. You know, 1,000 years ago, when my ancestors named this river, they named it Tayari with an A instead of an E. And I guess for us, it just gives you a deeper insight into the health and well-being of that river. For us, Tayari refers to the shining waters. Some say that could be the translation for that name. And you know, the word Taieri has no meaning, and therefore has no mana. And so one way that you know, we can give our mana back to the river, we can empower the river. You know, we view our water, we view our rivers as our ancestors. We were shaped by those rivers, our language, our culture, our customs. They all come from our waterways, our rivers, and especially the Tayari. It was one of the most important rivers to our people over the, you know, our connection to this place is over 50 generations. And we've experienced and we've seen the changes over that 1,000-year period, and it's recorded in our songs, it's recorded in our place names. And the name Tayari, you know, for me, it refers to the abundance of tuna, of eels, of kanakana, all of our native fish, our native birds, our forests. It encapsulates all of those values. And I think it's something, as mana whenua, as the authority of this land, it is something that we're looking to restore and return that that sense of empowerment that the river should have and will have going forward into the future.
Kia ora tū mai. Just now hand over to Korako. Kia ora Korako.
Yeah, so I just wanted to take this opportunity to build on what Paulette and Tumai have said, looking at the past and the traditional connection to the awa, and take an opportunity to look forward and talk about some of the aspirations that mana whenua have for this awa, as well as the catchment in general. So one of our aspirations is for a continuous flow of water. And to my knowledge, there's only one physical structure in the Tayari River that obstructs flow. So looking at, say, 50 to 60 years down the track, it would be quite special in terms of some of the longest rivers in New Zealand to have a river which is unobstructed from Kāi Tahu, or from the mountains to the sea. So that's one of the aspirations. We also seek to have the ability to interact and access the river and the wetlands and lakes within the catchment, and be able to practice our traditional practices and transmit that knowledge, and through those practices instill the values of kaitiaki taka and guardianship, stewardship for the environment in our future generations. Another thing that the younger generation are quite aware of, the impacts of climate change. So we want to see that our communities and our people that live in this area are resilient to climate change, but that the solutions are done in such a way that's works within the modi or the character of the river, solutions which not impose themselves on the river. So, looking at things like natural solutions and harnessing the environment to look after, these effects of climate change that are predicted. I think something that Tumai was speaking about was about the 1,000 years and the places of this catchment that our ancestors went to. So something for me personally would be in 50 or 60 years to be able to travel to areas of this catchment and gaze upon an environment which was similar or recognizable to our ancestors several generations in the past. And that may need to be done through planting or restoration of species that are locally extinct. So that's just an insight into some of our aspirations. And I suppose just that Kāi approach, and then maybe something a little bit more perhaps on management in the future. We'd like to see things like monitoring and assessment of the site as something that can be done in partnership between territorial or regional authorities and mana whenua, so that we have that central role as kaitiaki and people of the land to be involved, to be leading that mahi as well, sort of from more of a management, I suppose, perspective. So kia ora, that's it from me, and I'll just pass back to Paulette for any concluding comments.
Tēnā korua, te reanga rangatahi meki. So no, that concludes our presentation. Thanks, David. I think it was important tonight for us to just speak about those traditional values and also those future aspirations. So tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Paulette. Appreciate that. It gives a background on what we're all seeking to achieve here as well. So I appreciate it. And I should say Tim Vile from Okaha is also supporting mana whenua on the call tonight. Amber Smith is presenting, so I'll pass over to you, Amber.
Thanks, David. Kia ora koutou, ko Amber toko ingoa. Thank you, Paulette, Karako and Tumai, for focusing us tonight on what matters, water. Water is why we are here tonight, specifically how we will look after and improve our water through the new Land and Water Regional Plan. This presentation is for the general public to understand what we are doing and how they can be involved. There may be some attending tonight who have a lot of experience in this area, and if that is you, then please bear with me while I cover the basics. There'll be a couple of chances for you to contribute to the conversation throughout this presentation. Tonight I will talk about a couple of things. The first is the what, why and how of the new Land and Water Regional Plan. The second is the vision and values for the Taieri, how we will use your feedback and the next steps of the consultation. So first up, what is a Land and Water Regional Plan? A Land and Water Regional Plan manages activities that have an impact on our natural resources, particularly fresh water. The plan will include objectives, policies and rules. Rules will specify which activities will be permitted and which activities will require a resource consent. Why do we need a new plan? Our current water plan is out of date. It was notified in 1998, so it will be 25 years old next year when we notify our new plan. Our environment has changed a lot in these last 25 years. Increasing urbanisation, intensifying agricultural development, and climate change are having a real impact on our natural environment. The resulting degradation in water quality has many impacts. Declining biodiversity, threatened species, and risk to human health are just a few examples. Freshwater reform and the goal of improving fresh waterways within a generation has brought with it a raft of new expectations of the Regional Council. We are required to maintain our fresh water where quality is good and improve where it isn't. New legislation which will affect the water plan includes the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, which brings me to the next slide. The hierarchy of plans. This slide shows the legislation that we need to give effect to when writing the Land and Water Regional Plan. Firstly, we must give effect to the Treaty of Waitangi. Secondly, we must give effect to the Resource Management Act, which allows the use of natural resources whilst promoting sustainable management. The third box down on the left is the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. It is our guiding document in this plan-making process. It includes the National Objectives Framework, which ensures prudent management of water for future generations, and Te Mana o Te Wai, a key concept which I will cover in the next slide. Moving down the hierarchy, our own regional policy statement and Land and Water Regional Plan together provide the framework and leadership to fulfil these requirements. Te Mana o Te Wai is a central concept in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. An important part of Te Mana o Te Wai is that it recognises that everybody has a responsibility to look after water. Te Mana o Te Wai refers to the vital importance of water. When managing fresh water, we first must consider the health and well-being of the water before the health needs of people, such as drinking water. The third priority is the ability of people and communities to provide for their social, economic and cultural well-being. The idea is that if we look after the water, it will look after us. So I've covered the what and why. Now let's move on to how. As mentioned before, iwi are with us every step of the way during this process, from consultation to plan drafting and on to notification. We are taking what we know from past consultations and building on that knowledge. The Regional Policy Statement, which we consulted on during 2020, contains visions for each FMU or rohe, which feeds into the values and outcomes of the new Land and Water Plan, as you will see on the next slide. Alongside that, we have several work programs, including environmental monitoring and economics, which give us a better understanding of the interdependencies around water, its uses, and its current state and trends. Finally, the reason that you are all here, we need to engage with our communities to find out what you value in the natural environment. This will help us make a plan that achieves those outcomes. Another how slide, and a more technical one, but I will talk you through it and then we can stop for some questions afterwards. Firstly, a freshwater management unit, or rohe, is basically a water catchment on a scale that we can manage. Otago is divided into 5 freshwater management units, or FMUs, with the largest, the Clutha Mata'o, divided again into 5 rohe, which means area. Our regional policy statement contains freshwater visions for each FMU and rohe, which I will cover in more detail in the second half of this presentation. I'm now going to run through the policy process example that you can see on the slide. This is an example only, not what will necessarily end up in the plan. One of the visions for the Taieri FMU is sedimentation of the Waipori-Waihola complex is reduced. The value here is water quality. One of the key characteristics of water quality is clarity. If we know that clarity is an important characteristic, we can create an outcome such as Waipori and Waihola have clear water throughout the year. Next, our science team will identify the attribute which we will measure to know if we are achieving our goal. In this case, the attribute is suspended fine sediment. We can set up a monitoring program to measure this attribute in our water. To achieve the outcome, we will set limits on water and land use activities. An example of these would be rules about discharges, setbacks for earthworks, or stock exclusion. And after that slide, I think we can pause to take any questions that pop up.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. So if you have any questions, please either put them in the chat or raise your hand using that toolbar down the bottom. We've just got a couple of comments here. Chris Arbuckle notes that there are two main flow controls, the Loganburn Reservoir and the Pairao Weir, that affect mainstream and tributary flows. Just going to your point around in-stream structures or diversions of flows. The former lawyer or current lawyer, Councillor Wilson, makes a point there around te tiriti o Waitangi rather than the English version. So just a couple of questions while everyone else is throwing some questions in there. Anita, there's already a heap of good work happening in the top of the Tayari. How would that be reflected in this plan development process?
Thanks, David. We talked about a few questions I might answer, but I don't think that was one of the ones that you gave me a heads up on. Yeah, so I guess what we're really aware of is that there's a whole lot of good work being done, and ORC's got various roles in lots of those work programs. And so the key thing for us is to make sure that what we do produce in terms of the land and water plan works in conjunction with and supports those work programs. So we're not necessarily predetermined on what the plan needs to, or how the plan needs to deliver, but it's about the outcomes, and if there are other ways through existing work programs and some of the other not ORC projects, that's a terrible phrase, projects not run by ORC that can achieve the same outcome, then that's really, that's really useful, and it is about the outcome rather than the how.
Yeah. Thanks, Anita, and your apologies, a bit of a hospital pass. And I think MPS also refers to action plans and that combination of regulatory and non-regulatory as well, doesn't it? So it is intended to combine the two and achieve the right result. Councillor Wilson, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that the other thing, obviously, that's getting quite a bit of focus at the moment is the freshwater farm plans. And there's a lot of work going on in that space, and they're going to be a key tool in how we manage freshwater going forward. And there's lots of discussion about making sure that they can be applied at the right scale. So sometimes that's property scale and sometimes bigger. And so there are potentials for those to be catchment wide rather than property specific. And I think they'll be a really important tool. And move away a little bit from just a rule focus for managing freshwater and land.
Thanks, Anita. And if there's anyone on this call who has some expertise in the development of the farm planning process, please feel free to chip in. Councillor Wilson, really interested in knowing if the peat bogs on Rock and Pillar can be better protected from those driving through them. So the peat bogs, and I guess existing, is that are those roads or off-road driving? So how would the land and water regional plan, or in fact the regional policy statement, address areas, high-value areas that are being driven through by traffic?
Yeah, so there's actually a few regional plans around the country that have rules that restrict off-road driving and driving through rivers and across things like that. So there's absolutely, an opportunity for us to do that. Probably one of the key aspects of that is how we'd implement the rule and how you'd monitor it to make sure it doesn't happen, because one of those things that we're aware of is just because there's a rule doesn't necessarily mean people would stop doing it. So it would be around making sure that those types of rules have the right implementation strategies going along with them to stop it happening and to encourage different behaviour.
Thanks, Anita. And Dawn's just asked a two-pronged question. Can you give us some context around water quality in the Taieri? I think, given the complexity of the area, what we'll do is we'll have an offline discussion around that because it's quite a complex area. But I think that the next point is one we can discuss here is around Taieri is prone to flooding. How do we take this into consideration? So that might mean, for example, sediment loads, high sediment loads when we have high flood events.
So I can attempt to answer that as well, if you like. And you're right, David, there are things like sediment loads and the plan will do as much as it can in terms of encouraging, practices that keeps, dirt on land and in paddocks where it has value for farmers and not in the river. But we've got to be realistic too about Mother Nature, and so making sure there's flexibility around things like, one of the issues I know in Southland is stock access or stock exclusion on floodplains is a really tricky subject. So it's finding a balance between what we need to do to protect, rivers and waterways and what actually works on the ground. So all of those natural hazards are things that we need to consider and work through, and that's where we need input from farmers, how to manage those floodplains better than not better than we do, but in conjunction with what we do. So we need on the ground information from you guys to support that stuff so that we can get something that is actually practical and workable in the plan.
Thanks, Anita. And Dawn, just in terms of your initial first part of the question, context around water quality, we'll be putting information up on the web page, the Tayari web page, as we go through this process. Then that'll include water quality indicators, but we don't want to sort of try and pull it down to a 2-sentence summary at this point, but happy to have a conversation offline. Gavin from Oceana Gold has asked, is there going to be integration across the freshwater management units in the Land and Water Regional Plan, or are they to be documented in isolation? Is there going to be a chance to learn from what other freshwater management units might be coming up with?
So there's lots of questions inside that one question. So the way that the plan will be structured is essentially there'll be some provisions that apply across the region. So they'll apply everywhere, and then the FMUs will have specific provisions, rules, methods that apply just to that area. But we absolutely will be learning from what other FMUs are doing. If we're managing the same issues and they're caused by the same activities, then managing them the same way makes sense. But if they're not, often these issues can be caused by different activities or different geographical features and things like that. So it's about making sure that the FMUs recognise that they are all unique, and sometimes managing one the same as the other isn't the right thing to do. So the FMUs are the opportunity to have some refinement and some bespoke solutions for the problems within the FMU as a whole or within particular parts of the catchment. So I know the upper Taieri is quite different to the lower Taieri, so it might be that there's different sets of management regimes within the river that complement each other but aren't exactly the same.
Thanks, Anita. And I think that is also a point that that we're looking for feedback on as well, how those might be managed. Do the current Taieri flood and drainage schemes assist or detract with the policy from the policy objectives? So the existing structures, flood controls, etc., and the impacts those flood controls have on freshwater resources, do they assist or detract from what we're seeking to achieve here?
Sorry, I'm just contemplating that question, and I was hoping someone else might jump in and try to answer it while I have a think about it. I suppose it's important for ORC to recognise that we have multiple functions, and those schemes have particular design requirements and provide surety for you know, particular groups of users. But as part of doing the land and water plan, we will be working with those teams to make sure that whatever we develop going forward is the best thing for freshwater. And that might mean that over time and over some time, there's transitions away from the way that we've done things in the past to new ways of doing things. And that's got to be part of what we're doing, is being open to looking at new ways to do things. So I suppose for us, the focus is on looking forward to make sure, you know, all of ORC is working towards the same goal.
Thanks, Anita. Rather complex question to answer, Ray. And we are going to stick around after the meeting's closed, so we can have a bit more of a discussion around that if you'd like to. Do we have any more questions? Amber, would you mind kicking on to the next slide, please?
Yeah, thanks, David. And thank you everyone for those really good questions. In this final part of the presentation, I will discuss the visions and values for the Taieri FMU, the 3 stages of consultation, and how to submit your feedback. In front of us is the Taieri FMU Long-Term Vision, which is part of the proposed regional policy statement. Our plan is part of the roadmap working towards achieving this vision, with the goal of reaching it by 2050. You can see the 3rd point on the slide as the example we talked through earlier regarding the reduction of sedimentation in the Waipori-Waihola complex. Now we come to values. A value is something that you treasure or is that important, or that is important to you. The National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management directs us to include compulsory values, consider others, and identify with community any further values that are relevant to your FMU. At this stage, it would be great if you could share which of these values are important to you, or any values you can think of which aren't written here. And I know there are some people here tonight who do some great work improving environmental outcomes. I'd really like to hear from you to understand the work you're doing and the values that you are promoting. So feel free to write these down in the chat box, or you can raise your hand if you want to have a chat. So David, do you think that we want to pause here for any discussion?
We have a bit of a chunky question from Chris, so we might kick on and then we'll just address that at the end once we get through the survey.
Okay then. Rightio. I will continue.
Unless there are any, well, no, we'll kick on, then we'll pause shortly.
Okay, great. Alrighty, well, we're nearly at the end of this presentation with time for more questions at the end. Right now, I want to talk about what the rest of the consultation looks like and how you can give feedback. We're in the first of 3 consultation stages. This phase is all about values and characteristics, as you will see in our survey at the end of this presentation. Once we receive your feedback, we will work with our science team to come up with some management options to achieve a range of environmental outcomes. These will be presented and discussed with you later this year. The 3rd stage of consultation will be the presentation of a preferred management option, which will happen early next year. Following on from that, we will be writing the plan with mana whenua, taking it to council, and then following the RMA process so that it can be notified in December next year. How can you have a say? We wish we were talking to you in person, but because of COVID peaking in our community, we cannot meet face to face for this conversation. So we have created a survey which can be taken online or in paper format to find out your values and the locations of those values. You can fill out the survey online, which I will demonstrate in a moment. We can also send out a paper survey to anyone who cannot get online. If you would like to request a paper copy, just contact our customer services team on the 0800 number or by email, and they will send out a paper survey with a return envelope. The survey is open for 4 weeks. I'll now show you the online survey so you can see what it's all about. Here we have the ORC webpage. This is the first page you'll come to, and right in the middle at the front is the land and water plan, and you just click there to get involved. It brings you to the land and water plan page. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can see some information about FMU and rohe. You can see the meeting that we are attending tonight, and you can come to the online survey. So you can just click the button, it will take you to the online survey. Here's the online survey, and the paper survey is exactly the same. There are a few instructions at the start. Again, you can have a look into your address to find out which FMU you're in. The first question is just selecting which FMU you'd like to answer for. And if you would like to answer for more than one, there's the Tayari, you can do as many surveys as you want for as many areas as you wish. The Tayari is open for the next 4 weeks until the 14th of April. And some of these other ones are shutting down on the 28th of March. So question 2, select the things that matter to you. Here's a list of values, and you can choose as many or as few as you wish. And if there's something that you want to give feedback on which is not here, you can click something else at the bottom. When you click on one of these values, it will take you to a list of characteristics, and we want to know which of these characteristics are important to you. Again, you can tick as many as you wish, and we want to find out how the condition of those characteristics has been for you. So the more values you tick, the longer and longer the survey will get. So I would recommend that you take a wee bit of time. Don't try and do it in too much of a rush. There's just some optional questions at the end, and then you can click submit. When you click submit, you will be taken to a page which will show you it will prompt you to go to the online mapping tool. And I do really encourage that you use this fantastic tool. Here it is. You can see the Tayari right in the middle there. And the cool thing about this tool is you can actually see some pins that other people have dropped on it. So over here on the left-hand side, there is a plus sign. You click on that, you can see all of the values here that we spoke about before, including the value of something else at the end. So you can zoom in on the map anywhere you like, and you can actually see other people's values, as a matter of fact. I was looking at this earlier today and I saw some people were enjoying swimming and picnicking in Lake Waihola. So you can drag a pin anywhere you like, and you can pop it on the map, and you can add a comment if you're concerned about threatened species in this area. If you want to add an image, it will request your email and a password. Once you've completed that, you can drop as many pins on as many areas as you want. And yeah, we really encourage you to get involved. That gives our scientists good locational information to work off. So that's pretty much the survey. I will head on back to the presentation, and
Might just pause for a few questions there, if you don't mind, Emma.
Yep, great.
First is from Ray. Can you upload documents onto the online survey?
Well, you can upload photographs, not documents. If you have a document, it's probably best to send to our customer services team by email, and they can then forward it on to us and the policy team.
Or excuse me, Amber, it's Rachel Curry here, or you could email them direct to me. I'll put my email address in the chat box as well.
Great.
If you've got something that you want us to have a look at, Ray, or a document that you think would be useful, it can just come straight to me.
I think there's also the opportunity, Amber, to provide general feedback. It's not just feedback within the structured processes. The categories we've asked for, there is the opportunity to provide general feedback, and that might include reference to documents or broader information as well in the survey.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So any other questions relating to the survey itself? If there are no questions relating to the survey itself. Or just, is there anyone who wants to volunteer to discuss a value they have for freshwater in the Tayari, and how we might consider it in this context, to talk about some of the freshwater values in the area and what that means to them?
I'm just going to share in the Dunedin Coast on Monday night, we actually had one of our participants walking around the Leith and showing us particular things that he liked to do and see and interact with as values. So it was a really, really awesome way for him to share with us. So, you know, he had values like, you know, swimming and access just for picnicking and recreating and things like that. So any of those types of values, or, you know, any other values that you might have, extractive uses, fishing. Sometimes people are reluctant to give up their fishing spots, but you know, any of those kinds of values, that's what we'd love to hear and hear from you tonight, if we could.
I think also, so yeah, did right, Anita, and some of the good work that's happening, how the work that's happening on the ground, and how that's helping to deliver on your own or community values. Just while that's happening, Amber, Councillor Robertson's just pointed out maybe reminding us of what the survey will be used to do, and maybe stepping through those consultation stages as well. How will the survey be used, and what will that mean for those next consultation steps?
Yep, so the survey data, it will inform us which of the values are important and where, and which of the characteristics are important and where. So for example, if we knew that water clarity was a particularly important characteristic in a particular area, then we can create management options to deliver on that outcome. And that will be, and then we can come back in phase 2 and we can present the trade-offs, if you like, in terms of how we can achieve that and what it will mean.
So in identifying those values, we then come back to the community with a range of potential options in the second phase of meetings, and then come forward with a preferred option, and both towards the end of this year. And those will be face-to-face, and those will be when we've sort of put our necks on the line and give you some clarity around what we're discussing, how we've translated your values into environmental outcomes and management approaches. Morgan Trotter, brave man, please.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. I'm having a bit of trouble with connection. I'm in Naseby and with no Wi-Fi. So I'm fortunate to be project manager for the Taieri Mini-Otago project. And as you're probably aware, we're trying to restore native vegetation to large parts of the scroll plain. And we've got 1,000 plants in, and we want to get at least 45,000 in and up to 90,000. We're aiming to put in 200 kilometres of fencing around waterways to protect and enhance water quality. And we had quite a good day today, working in conjunction with the ORC, spraying willows up in the sticks. So trying to eliminate the pest plants out of the top of the catchment. Yeah, so we're really keen to work with you as much as we can. And another objective of ours is the development of a catchment plan to improve water quality. And I'm sure that will have very similar aims and goals to much of the FMU process. So really looking forward to working with you.
Thanks, Morgan, appreciate that. Dawn's just saying there is survey overload in the farming sector. How can we ensure that we get lots of feedback from the farming sector? Yeah, I must say, Dawn, as we discussed the other day, I think that's well recognised within ORC, and it really comes down to people like yourself encouraging people to get online and fill out the survey. And it's important that although the survey itself is quite complex, you really only need to focus on the values that are important to you. So you don't have to go through the whole survey and fill out every particular aspect of the survey. You can really focus on the values that are important. So you can make it as complex or as simple as you want. But really, it's farmer leaders like yourself, Dawn, who can encourage people to get online, spend 5 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever they like, just to get that survey done. Direct communication is best communication. We've got a couple of chunky questions. One from Dawn. Wendy. All values are important. Restoration around waterways so that all can benefit from this in the long term. So I'm taking from that, Wendy, that the primacy of the environment is really important to this process, and restoration is a component of that primacy. So really making sure that we're really valuing the water, and then putting in place restoration plans to deliver on that long-term benefit, sustainable land use, sustainable water use. If you've got anything else you want to chip in, please do. Chris, you've made a question there around legacy issues and complex history of land use change in the Taieri, especially related to use of its land and water, and historical guide mining legacy issues. Would you mind just vocalizing that sort of discussion? Because it is a quite complex question.
Yes, sorry for that one. I was just reflecting, and for my benefit, I've spent a large amount of my life doing research in the previous life as the water quality scientist on the Taieri. I think worked with Gretchen on the first sort of catchment group, the Taieri Trust, with the Taieri back in the mid-90s. So that history kind of brings me back to thinking about the legacy issues, not only, I suppose, of my own self with the science that I've done, but what our forefathers, and in reference to discussions by tangata whenua about the history and the values of the Taieri. So that question around the legacy issues is something that is a struggle for us when we look to set limits and, I suppose, controls on activities in a present day. I just was wondering how the Regional Council was kind of linking back through things like the historic gold mining activities in the Kai Burn and elsewhere that all currently still generate significant sediment flows for the Taieri when we get over a sort of mean annual flood. And they're still filling out our very special wetlands down in the Waihola and Waipori. So just how to work through that with community to make sure that we don't burden existing community members and farmers with rules that may not be really targeted at their present day impacts. So I know it's a meaty one, and it's just something that I've talked through with a number of other areas around legacy issues and how we measure that out and how we make sure that we're impacting the things that matter today and help fix the stuff in the past.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and it's a very relevant question, and I think you'd probably be as valid at answering that question as we are. But I think it goes to a point. So we've got that freshwater vision with the end date of 2050 in mind. And I'll pass over to Anita in terms of what that actually means. So I think dealing with legacy issues and sort of incremental steps towards that goal, prioritising community values, I guess, Anita.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks, Chris. This is the questions from this meeting tonight have been the most complex we've had out of all six. So it's really good to have them. And Chris, you're right, there are legacy issues, and we see it often in water quality spaces too, with groundwater lags and things like that, and often we're getting asked to address issues from land application 50 years ago, and I don't have the answer to it, but it's something that we're live to, and perhaps your brain and our brains might help to come up with the answer. But it's one of those. My apologies for the cat walking across the laptop. It's one of those issues that we are mindful of, and David's just mentioned the freshwater vision, which talks about 2050. So it's getting us to a particular point in time in 2050 by incremental steps. But beyond 2050, there's going to need to be continued work, and I think that some of those legacy issues need to be the things that we take the time to do. But in the interim, make sure that we don't continue to contribute to the problem. And that's, I think, the differentiation between the short, medium and long-term goals and actions that we have enable us to make sure that we're not making life harder for ourselves while we look at solving those long-term issues. So don't know the answer, certainly live to it. and happy to have any and all input that you can provide us to help draw those connections, really.
No, thanks, Anita. It's a good, compassionate answer, and it's the real challenge, isn't it? So thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Anita. Jock has asked a question, spraying of willows, would not be a good idea to let the communities know when spraying is happening with chemicals, just so that they can avoid it. I think that is the sort of thing that the non-regulatory sort of stuff we need to be aware of as a council and communication stuff. So
yeah, and there's also it's not uncommon for there to be what we call permitted activity rules in the plan that say you can undertake a certain activity provided you let people in the area know or have some kind of communication so that people can stay out of the water and there is an awareness. So there's lots of regulatory but also non-regulatory ways that we can make sure that sort of stuff is communicated so that everyone is safe and can enjoy access to water. And it's one of the things that's currently being discussed around the proposed changes to the NES on drinking water, because obviously one of the things we need to do is make sure that the source water is kept clear of weeds, and that's often done with weed spraying. So there's that conversation happening at the national level about the connection between how often you need to spray and how often you need to stop water being taken while you do that to make sure that the drinking water is safe. So it's certainly something that that we're considering, and it's in our in the mix of things that we need to think about.
thanks, Anita. Ray's just asked a question around the economic costs and benefits of the proposed plan policies. Will they be considered during the process, and how will the economic costs and benefits be considered in the process? So there is an economic impact assessment and an economic work program underway, and there will be information going up on the webpage, Ray, about the economic assessment as we go through it. I'm happy to provide you some information if you wouldn't mind flicking me an email, or I'll grab your email address. But Anita, how will economic costs and benefits be assessed in the plan development process itself?
Thanks, David. Yeah, so there's a few different aspects to the economics work program. So as well as the science and the policy work, we do have the economic work stream. So there's a farmer grower group, there's an industry action group, there's a Māori economy work stream, and there's a regional freshwater. I can't think exactly what the name of the fourth element is, but that's to make sure that as an organisation and as far as we can share with the community when we come back with options and preferred options, is we've got an understanding of exactly how these things fit, impact at a micro and a macro level. And David's right, there is a baseline requirement under the RMA to do that. There's also costs associated with some of the national regulation. We won't specifically be taking those into account because they've already been considered at a national level, but it's part of what we understand will happen on the farm is if you've got to implement the national regulations as well as additional requirements, then one of the levers that ORC does have is the time lever. So a really key part of coming back to you in phase 2 will be getting an understanding of how much time people need to implement these particular actions, knowing, if we ask you to do thing X or thing Y, you'll have a good understanding of what it might cost you, and it's giving you enough time to make sure you can do that.
Cheers, Anita. And I think that also goes to the feedback survey through the feedback through the survey as well. Just making sure that if you have any values relating to economic values, that those are considered. Ray, I've got your email address and I'll send you an email directly after this. Councillor Wilson, there are many issues but limited dollars and times. How will priorities be chosen? Will community be well involved in these priorities? Well, that is one of the key points of this process is that first stage of getting community understanding of, getting our understanding of community visions, values, and the characteristics they're looking for. I think it's also goes to the point you were making, Anita, around so having that conversation with communities so that those go into the plans. And I think also the interrelationship between the regulatory and the non-regulatory work. We want to involve communities as much as we can. But of course, we have that new national direction, and they will result in some more stringent regulations. So is there anything you want to add to that, Anita?
I would just add that the national policy statement in Te Mana o Te Wai does set out that hierarchy of obligations and priorities, so that's obviously that's our central focus. And then if you're into the third priority, so the economic and social uses, then where there's allocation available in quality and quantity, then that's absolutely what the community needs to tell us their priorities. So if you've got 3 or 4 different types of activities that all might want the same resource, which one as a community do you want? Is there a preference, or are you happy that they're all treated the same? One of the topics that comes up reasonably regularly is something like sorry, I'm just seeing Kate's message. She's not even talking about allocation. I'll just finish what I'm saying, and then perhaps she can ask the question out loud. I was just going to say water bottling is one of the topics that comes up. There might be some communities that don't want water to go to water bottling, and others that do. And so it's that kind of prioritisation that that tier 3 water availability allows us to get the community feedback on. This might pay for Councillor Wilson to ask her question, because I've clearly misinterpreted it. So apologies.
Sorry, Anita, and I am here as a resident near the Taieri, more so than I'm deferring to Gretchen on as a councillor. There's remediation work, whether it be riparian plantings or sediment control or a number of other, fencing off of waterways. They're all really good projects. There is only a certain amount of money and energy and time. It's actually doing the first stuff's the easy stuff. It's maintaining it's the hard bit. And I'm just wondering how the council is going to lead the community to come up with the best set of priorities for them. Is it going to be us all doing surveys and you coming up with them from the survey results, or what is the process? And I totally appreciate here we've got a big say in this. How do we get everyone on board to that? And I'm presuming it's going to be through the catchment work.
I think it's about setting the direction. Where do we need to get to through the plan, and then working with communities around that, Councillor Wilson. It's so that just underlines the need for people to get involved in this process, so we can identify the values that we need to deliver on. And then work with the community around that as well.
But just to add to that, one of the science work streams is looking at, for want of a better term, bang for buck. So which mitigations, which actions, achieve, the best outcomes and things like that. So that's very much part of the information sharing process, is understanding that some things are better than the other, and which combination of things get the best value at the least cost, as a critical question for us.
And I think it is important to note is there's an intention to increase the monitoring and science in the Tayari as well. So it's as we get more information, we can have more informed decisions. Gavin Hurley, you would like to share some comments on the survey?
Yes, thanks, David. No, I've taken a look at the survey and completed it. A real comment, I think that one of the weaknesses, if I was talking about characteristics, would depend entirely on where I was standing. If I was on the shores of Lake Waihola, I would tick a totally different set of boxes from my expectations of what I expect from Waihola, as if I was in the Southburn Creek at the Patiroa swimming hole, or indeed if I was at the Green Bridge that crosses the Taieri River in the Lower Maniatoto. So I think the survey was designed in a way that will not give you the real answers of the issues and the characteristics of people, because it's not specific enough of where they are commenting on. If they're commenting on water quality improvements in the Maniatoto over the last 5 years, there'll be a lot of ticks of boxes. In some areas further down in the catchment, that may not be the case. So I just make that comment. Further, like you, David, I'm concerned about the number of people who are engaging in this whole process. If I look at the number of people from the Maniatoto or the Tayari who are work, live, and depend on, that's their area of where they live as a community. There are only about 4, less than on one hand, I would think, as against the very good meetings that were held some 18 months ago, public meetings where all of the community were invited in Ranfurly and in Middlemarch, very well attended. Those were meetings that talked in depth about people's aspirations, the characteristics they wanted from the water quality expectations. That work was that written up at that stage. I believe that is much more pertinent to the overall thrust of this work than the process we're going through at the moment, including this meeting tonight. We've got very few people who have got skin in the game.
Thanks, Kevin. And it's a relevant point, and I should have said right at the start, we were planning to have these meetings in person, because that's exactly the sort of turnout and exactly the sort of discussion we wanted. So this is very much a second option for both the people we're talking with and hearing from, and also for ourselves. Anita, do you just want to touch on that proposed regional policy statement, that Freshwater Visions process, and how that's informed this process?
Yeah, sure. So so we have got that information, Gavin, and we have used it and are using it. So it's one of the inputs. And so the survey is one input. The data that we got from those RPS Visions meeting in late 2020, and it was quite data rich. So you're right, there's a lot of information there. We've been using that as well. And so it's one input. I'm pleased to hear that you thought those meetings were useful. And I guess the key thing I'd say about tonight's meeting is we do want to drive people to do the survey. It's really important, hearing your limitations, and it's one input and part of just the start of a consultation. So there's still more work to be done, and we've still got to keep coming back to you. But absolutely, we've got that data from 2020, and we do use it, and we will be using it.
I might just jump in there and add that yes, we really hear your concerns about the limitations of the survey. If you use the mapping tool, then you can be quite specific about the locations that you want to refer us to, and you can leave quite detailed comments on any location in terms of characteristic value or anything else you think of. So I'd encourage you to do the mapping tool if you are able to.
And I think that goes to given your point around those more meaty discussions at towards the end of this year when we come back with environmental outcomes. We really put the information on the table and have those more detailed discussions with the people who are directly affected by it as well. But yes, again, really need the likes of yourselves to encourage people to get involved in the survey. So if we've only got 4 to 6 people who you think we should be hearing from on this call, then obviously then passing on the survey to them is very useful. Have we got any more questions around the survey or the process itself? So Tim.
David, if I could make a comment again on the process. We're going through this FMU process, and you've been doing this for the last fortnight. That is all the basis for all that is the proposed regional policy statement, which is still going through and is about to go through a major hearing process. Are we getting the horse before the cart before the horse in this, or is the regional policy statement really a given, and the hearing is but a formal process rather than a process where change in the regional policy statement may be entertained by the hearing panel? Maybe one for Anita.
Would you guys like to talk to the timeframes and the order of the RPS processes versus the Land and Water Regional Plan, just to give us a bit of an overview, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And Gavin, I suppose you've hit on one of our biggest challenges, as you know, there is a hierarchy, and you get the RPS settled, and then you do the Land and Water Plan, and everything is compressed really tightly. The hearing for the RPS is not just a formality, and there is a possibility of change. So one of the key things for us is to try and get the chapters that direct the Land and Water Plan through and out the other end as quickly as possible, so that there is some certainty. There are factors outside of our control in terms of how that happens, and so there's always a bit of uncertainty just around some of this. The intention is that the RPS will have decisions early into next year, and then we'll use that for just to as we're doing the final drafting of the plan. Sorry, now I've got a dog on my lap, between cats and dogs. We'll be making sure that the final version of the RPS is the plan is consistent with the RPS. So for us, there's lots of checks and balances, but it is dependent on getting a decision on the RPS in time for the Land and Water Plan to get notified at the end of next year. So the start and end of next year are quite critical dates for us. But no, the hearing process on the RPS is absolutely not a formality, and there's a panel appointed that are ready and reading submissions, and getting ready to listen to conversations about it. So things can and will change as a result of that.
Thanks, Anita. Does that answer your question, Gavin?
Thank you.
Ray's got a question. The work, He Waka Eke Noa work that's currently being undertaken will impact the catchment greatly. So obviously there are mitigation, adaptation or mitigation requirements under He Waka Eke Noa that will have an impact on farmers and growers. How will that be considered in the Land and Water Regional Plan process?
This is one I actually don't have enough information about to add any value at all, David. So we're probably better to come back to Ray on this question, I think.
Ray, there's sort of parallel processes in that He Waka Eke Noa will drive some mitigation on farm, as will the Land and Water Regional Plan process. But I'm picking likely what you're saying here is there's a heap going on. They will both work streams will have impacts. He Waka Eke Noa, also the Land and Water Regional Plan. How will they interact, and how will those parallel processes and the parallel impacts on farmers and growers, how will they be considered? And it will fundamentally change economic activity. I guess that is one of the things we need to consider, but in terms of the requirement to deliver on those that national direction, it's fairly clear. So two parallel processes, both will have impacts. We're not blind to the concern this is causing for farmers and growers and rural communities, but these are processes that have to happen. But we can have a bit of an offline. Well, no, that's sort of more than happy to have an offline chat around that as well, Ray. So we might just kick on. Amber, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So the survey closes on 14th April 2022. The surveys, if you have interest in other FMU or rohe, you can provide feedback through those surveys, but it is important to note that some of those, the surveys are closing at different times. So please check the specific web page for each freshwater management unit or rohe. As Amber said, if you need a paper copy, please email customer services team or give them a call. Information on the Tayari Freshwater Management Unit and the process itself will be constantly updated, including a socio-economic assessment of the rohe, which is still being developed. When we have information, we'll put that up on the page. If you're interested in staying in touch on this process, please provide your contact details through the survey. It will only be used for the purpose of the survey. And we will be in person in your area in the second half of 2022 to talk about preferred management options. Staff are going to stay online for a little bit after the meeting is formally closed, and Chris Arbuckle has kindly offered to have a bit of a chat around how He Waka Eke Noa and the Land and Water Regional Plan, or the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management process, will be considered. As he says, it's a big question. So if you wanted to stick around, I think it was Ray, if you have time to stick around afterwards, we can have a bit of a chat around that as well. So thank you for taking the time and effort. Really appreciate you taking the time and effort to jump on board. So yeah, thanks. Rachel sending through some information through about the closing of the survey as well. So I really appreciate you jumping on board. Do really encourage you to get in touch with your friends and whānau, just to encourage them to take part in the survey. It is really important. It may not seem like it's important to fill out a survey, but it really is. And then we can come back and talk to you end of 2022 as well around some of those media discussions. Councillor Robertson, do you mind if I pass to you?
Yeah, sure. Kia ora, David, Amber. Yeah, I just wanted to finish as we started, acknowledging everyone that has come along this evening. To Paulette, Tumai, Korako, thank you very much for speaking this evening as well. 50 generations of knowledge embodied within you is amazing. And really important, and also everyone else that's in the room as well today. I think there was 45 at one stage, and I had a good look at the types of people that we have attracted this evening, and there's a huge diversity. There's a massive amount of knowledge and understanding, I think, in this catchment. It's hugely important to many people in Otago and beyond. The bulk of Dunedin's drinking water comes from this catchment. It's the closest large river to Dunedin as well for recreation. Has a lot of people that live in the catchment and really care about their backyards and make their livings in this area as well. So there's a heap of passion. There's a lot of values when you start to think about the Tayari and what are the places that you like the best and what makes it special. There's just so many that it's hard to think about where you're going to put all of those pins and what you'd like to say about it. But it's important that we do, and that we encourage other people to really have a good think about what makes this catchment important. And think about beyond just people tonight, perhaps there's a really good tool you could use in classrooms as well. Be great to get some pinpoints down from younger generation as well. We couldn't meet in person, but perhaps there's a chance that you could bring small community groups together and do it together. I liked what Gavin talked about on the 2020 was it? Yeah, when we got together and community got really engaged in this. And I think there's still opportunities to get in small groups and do it that way, I think, if you wanted to. And agencies too. What else was I thinking? Yeah, David said values are what we really want to dig out of this stage, and then in more detail how we'll get to achieving those along the track. So if you can manage to give us that information through the survey, or as Amber said, use that mapping tool, and then you'll have a chance to add in as much info as you want to, really, as part of that. So that might be a more flexible way for some people too. But hey, I just wanted to acknowledge there are a lot of people here this evening. Many do have skin in the game, I think, Gavin, and for a number of reasons. And we acknowledge you all. And thanks heaps for being involved this evening.
Kia ora, Councillor Robertson. And yes, staff will stick around for a wee bit after the closing of the meeting, but I'll please invite Karako to provide a karakia.
Kia ora, David, mō tātou katoa, he kamihi mō ngā hui mai nei I tēnei pō. Ai he karakia mō te mauri tū o ngā whakaro me ngā wāwata o te whenua o te wai Māori I Tayari. Nō reira, he karakia whakamutunga mō te pō. Kia tau ka manaki taka te mea karo, ki roka ki tēnā o tātou, kia mahi e te huamā kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūturu, kia whakamaua, kia teina, humi e, hui e, taiki e. Kia ora, everybody.
Well, that concludes the meeting. If you want to stick around for a bit of a chat, please do. Chris Arbuckle, I think I've accidentally thrown you under a bus by saying that you would stick around and chat about the interrelationship between He Waka Eke Noa and the Land and Water Regional Plan, but would you rather me email you and Ray so you can have this chat offline, or would you rather have a bit of a discussion now?
Yeah, thanks, David. I just want to highlight from the point of view of the Ministry for the Environment, it's not just only He Waka Noa that we're trying to integrate across the policy frameworks that we're kind of opposed, I suppose, putting upon regional government. So we've not only got the NPS and all the provisions that are supporting the new FMU process, we've got more, I suppose, in the future, near future regulations around freshwater farm plans, and they were mentioned in the discussion that Anita kind of put up, and that's probably the most prevalent piece of legislation that's going to influence what farmers do in reference to freshwater that we've had for some time. I'm fortunate to work in the team which is called Climate, Water and Agriculture at MFE, and that includes the He Waka Noa team. And what we're trying to do within that group is to actually integrate what we expect freshwater farm plans to do on the ground and He Waka Noa. So we're making sure that farmers, putting simply, if there's information required for both those processes, and also benefits to the farmer, that they're kind of delivered through a singular framework. And I can talk in more detail with you, Ray, if you want to delve into the nuts and bolts of that. What it simply means is that we're trying to ultimately integrate a number of policy programs because we're looking at implementation versus policy for MFE. So that includes the wetlands regulations, the biodiversity, the nitrogen cap, intensive winter grazing, stock exclusions. So we're kind of nesting all of these policies in the freshwater farm plan framework so they implement sensibly and practically on farm. So that's really all I wanted to say, David, that we're attempting, I suppose, in the new way of working to use that word integration, but actually make it work across our policy areas. And if we do that properly, it means that discussions that regional council have are kind of nested within it and work with us and more particularly help communities understand the challenge. So,
thanks, Chris. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So you're looking to deliver a planning tool that will allow farmers to make optimal decisions across those sort of considerations or factors. Is that, yeah?
Yeah, probably a more pointed, you as a regional council will help deliver that planning tool to basically link those things together. So I'll pass the buck back to you there, David. But yeah, what we're trying to do is provide an integrated framework, and that's been talked about for quite a while. So integrated farm planning is a buzzword, but it really actually integrates policy outcomes, particularly when you're thinking about freshwater. So that's what we're attempting to do.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, look, my thinking was sort of up a level from that. I understand all that, and that was part of my submission to He Waka Kanoa, that they need to consider integrating whatever they do with a whole lot of other streams of work. If they persist under freshwater, to insist on every farmer preparing a plan and then audited every 3 years, hopefully there'll be some sense around getting efficiencies by coordination across the groups. My comment was more upper level around just the fundamental potential economic activity change if the pricing set under the 2 proposals come through as the case studies are modelled. So take my own farm under Taieri. The gross cost under one high scenario is $60,000 a year, and the sequestration benefits about $1,800 a year. So, and if I haven't quite got my handle yet around if I go and do mitigation factors, much of which will benefit your freshwater plan management, i.e. riparian planting, wetlands, which I'm working on at the moment. I don't know how much He Waka Kanoa is going to deliver as a multiplier to offset those gross emissions. But I've calculated, the net economic impact on my farm is kind of a net $50,000 per annum. So, I can kind of, the freshwater stuff and the nitrate caps and everything else, I think the Taieri is pretty well positioned for it. He Waka Kanoa, bearing in mind the Taieri covers a lot of sheep and beef farmers as well, man, that's got some potential to drive some change, which can cut right across any planning that you're doing at the moment. That's my key point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm based in Wanaka and I'm working High Country Station still in relationship to the work on freshwater farm plan. So that exact topic is hitting them. So how they get co-benefit from essentially what comes out of He Waka Kanoa and freshwater farm planning. And it is for front of our minds about co-benefit. I won't talk deeply about, I suppose, the technical elements of that, but there's challenges for places, particularly like the Taieri, and it's the same in my neck of the woods where most of the riparian areas that we fence are small, and the plant species, if you're following, I suppose, rules around using eco-source and historic plant species are not recognised currently as woody species that provide a hell of a lot of sequestration, but we could argue that till the cows come home around things like tussock grasslands and flaxes. So that's something we are looking at, the co-benefit and the relationship between sequestration. So it gets a double bang for you as a farmer. So you're doing those initiatives around riparian fencing and planting and within a decent buffer zone, et cetera, and then it co-links benefit for sequestration. So those are things we're looking at.
Cheers, Chris. Rachel, you've had your hand up for a bit.
I have. I just wanted to jump in here and say normally I would have stopped recording at the end of the meeting, but I thought that there might have been other people after the meeting that would have been interested in hearing what Chris has said. So I've just recorded this, but I'm just going to stop recording now. And if I need to take this bit down, Chris or Ray, you can talk to me about that. But I just wanted to say that I'm about to stop recording, but I did keep it on just for that part of the conversation. Thanks.
Chris, would you be happy with that going online, or do you want us to cut it off?